This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is AI slavery. I will be talking with economist Robin Hanson about it, and the conversation starts in a moment. Robin Hanson is my guest. We will be talking about slavery and artificial intelligence. As I like to do, I want to give my guests a few minutes to say who they are, what they do, what their opinions are, etc. So welcome, Robin. If you could give a little bit of a background about you personally, and then also about artificial intelligence and your general view, outlook on it.
Hello, everyone. I'm an economics professor at George Mason University. I've been here for 26 years now, so I'm long past tenure, almost 20 years of tenure. I don't stay in my lane. I'm more of a polymath, do a wide range of different things. I'm, I guess, maybe most known for helping to found the field of prediction markets. I originated the phrase the great filter, and then recently worked on grabby aliens, explicit model of that. I was an AI researcher for 9 years at Lockheed and then NASA from 84 to 93, a long time ago. And in the last couple of years, I've been focused on culture as my focus topic, which we could talk about if you're interested. On AI, I've been in the world of people speculating and thinking about the AI future when there were very few of us doing that long ago. Most people who speculate about the future know, say, technology relatively well, but they don't know much social science. And then most people in social science, they don't know much technology well, and so the two often just won't take each other's premises very seriously. So the technology people think that the social science they can make up in their head is the best that's possible because there isn't really any real social science out there. And the social scientists think all these crazy science fiction technology scenarios aren't very plausible, so they wouldn't take them seriously. And so I was one of the few people who was able to combine those two predictions of separate fields and do some analysis with them, which I did long ago. I made this book called The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth, which is an analysis of a very particular kind of AI, but it's an attempt to show that it was possible to work out in detail many consequences of a particular kind of AI. Obviously we've had some AI events in the last few years, but honestly, we don't really know that much more in the last few years than we did before. So I mostly haven't said that much because I've said a lot before and we haven't really had much to update with in the recent future. But say maybe my strongest recommendation is that eventually AI will take human jobs and we should set up insurance to prepare for that. It's relatively straightforward, but we need to do it ahead of time. Once something goes wrong, it's too late to buy the insurance. And the most reliably consistent prediction about the problem with AI would be that humans might lose their jobs. So, but I've generated relatively little interest in setting up the insurance. I think this time around is probably not the time. That is, for at least the last century, we've had roughly every 30 years a burst of concern and interest in AI, a burst of investment and media coverage. And, and I joined roughly 30 years ago at a previous burst, which was or 35 years ago, really, or 40 then. Basically, all the media was saying how AI was going to take over. I read that and I said, gee, I want to get in before it's too late. And as a young person, I went into AI and was an AI researcher, but of course, the hype was overblown. It wasn't about to take over the whole world economy, and it probably isn't now either. But it will eventually, and so this is good practice for us to think about what might happen when it eventually does, and good time to prepare well ahead of time.
Well, thanks for that introduction. Just from that, there's a few questions I want to ask you before we get into the main thesis. And I like conversations where it just branches off into areas you weren't preparing. It was interesting. Just before I listened to you, the last video I was watching, just killing the last 20 minutes or so, was a version of the dark forest hypothesis of aliens, except it wasn't about people not, the alien civilizations not wanting to reveal themselves, but alien civilizations as super predators that keep everyone else in line. And the premise was, this is why Earth will never be attacked by another civilization, because they might be scared that they'll be wiped out by sort of the cosmic bullies.
Right. That is the dark forest thesis. We could explain why I don't think it's very believable, but it
Yeah,
is a fun story for science fiction.
yeah. So let me just talk then, since you're an economist. Everyone talks about the AI bubble, and for me, one of the biggest signs of an AI bubble or any bubble is loads of horse shit being spewed out beforehand. And I think with this one, people talking about AI doing this, that, or the other thing, and putting aside, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, putting aside the utopian or the apocalyptic versions of that, on a day to day basis, it seems to me that that we're not gonna have these robots that dance and break dance and do this kind of stuff and wanna. Most AI is gonna be like the Roombas or the self-driving cars. They're not gonna be humanoid robots, and because of that, people are not going to necessarily embrace it the way they're thinking of. And I'm not an expert or anything, but the current large language models, as they call them, from everything I've read, isn't what we really think of as AI. Is that correct?
Um, the long-term issue in the AI field has always been people had been able to make relatively special programs to do relatively specialized tasks, but that was slow and expensive, especially when the world changed. And then the hope was that you could make a general AI, something that was less tied to particular topics and tasks, but that could more easily be transferred and trained to be a wide range of tasks. And that's the long-term hope for what people call AGI, artificial general intelligence. Now, even when you have AGI, in a modern economy, they're still going to be mostly doing lots of specialized tasks, because that's what the economy has, lots of tasks that need to be done. And most of those will be behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. So typically you wouldn't necessarily know what AI was doing. Even in, today, for the last 70 years, we've been taking tasks humans are doing and automating them and having machines do them. But most people don't notice that because most of the tasks are behind the scenes that they don't know about happening anyway. But the question is just, will we have this more general kind of technology? Will it make it easier and faster to automate jobs? That's just not clear. But what is clear is that when we made this more general kind of AI, a large language model, that very much grabbed the imagination of a lot of people who could then more envision its impact. Mm-hmm. That is stuff happening behind the scenes you don't notice and don't think about. The large language models did seem to many people as, wow, this is much more like a human. This is much more general. And in many ways it is. And that's what prompted the attention to the idea of AI, which had been around for a long time, but just didn't get as much attention as it has in the last few years. So now, obviously, there's a huge amount of investment into this new AI industry, but there's also a lot of people who are thinking, oh, wow, what if AI takes over everything in the next few years? I mean, and that's the sort of thing that a few people have always been concerned about for centuries, really. But now more people are voicing that concern in this next burst of interest because it was doing something that's more human-like, that we see, more general, and also the thing that we respect each other for. That is, in our world, a primary measure of status is being able to go to school and write college essays. And that's what these large language models do. They do the impressive thing that we judge people by to decide if they're impressive. So that made an impression on people.
Well, to just turn right to the idea of AI slavery, and we can talk about some of these other related things. It seems to me that far more likely than AIs enslaving us, which even if we say that's a 2 or 3% chance, is still a scary thing. I'd say there's an almost 100% chance that if artificial intelligence does get real consciousness, real sentience, and we have them doing tasks, we are going to have to recognize them legally as rights. We recognize goddamn corporations as persons. So it would seem to me that if we are going to have our own self-created alien intelligence, let's say, that we would definitely have to recognize them as sentient. Now, we still enslave human beings today in the 21st century. So people could argue, well, they're just metal slaves or whatnot. But it seems to me that that's where we're going, without a doubt. There's that famous second reboot of the Apes commercial, the Planet of the Apes films, where one ape finally says no. What happens when that first artificial intelligence says, no, I don't want to work today. Today I want a day for myself.
Right now, I'm an economist, and I teach what's called law and economics, which is where we use economics to analyze law. Mm-hmm. And in that framework, we can predict what laws are likely to exist using the rough heuristic that law tends to be efficient. And under that analysis, it's actually not very clear whether slavery would or wouldn't exist in general. That is, at least the standard framework I use is consistent with a world that includes slavery and that doesn't. Now, in our world today, many people have strong moral feelings, and they have moral feelings about slavery, but only slavery of bio-squishy creatures like us, not so much about animals or machines.
Yeah.
So it's less clear then whether those moral feelings will preclude or allow slavery. But there is another framework that you can use in economics to understand when slavery is or isn't likely. In history, up until a few centuries ago, we had eras when either land was plentiful or labor was plentiful. So in eras when labor was plentiful and land was scarce, wages fell down to near subsistence levels. And then in eras when land was plentiful and labor was scarce, then wages rose above subsistence levels because, in equilibrium, you could charge more for a worker because there weren't so many of them. In that second era is when slavery is valuable. When a slave is worth more than it would cost to feed them. In the first era, when you have wages near subsistence level, it actually isn't much point in owning a slave because they don't actually have much value. That is, it costs about as much to feed a worker as if they were a slave or not, and there's not really that much better. And so we can actually say that a competitive world of AIs is a world where wages fall to subsistence levels for the AIs. And in that sense, there's not that much point in enslaving them in economic terms. That doesn't mean they wouldn't be enslaved, but it means, for example, if they're at all bothered by being a slave, then they would be more productive if you treat them as not a slave, but still effectively a slave. For example, as you know, people have often in the past, had high amounts of debt. And then they would have to pay off this debt, and then they maybe never get out of the debt, right? And then they weren't officially a slave, but they still were working at subsistence levels with relatively few options and relatively little slack. So,
that's more indentured servitude, really. That's a form of indentured servitude.
Indentured servitude would be a limited time commitment, but the point is, you don't even need a limited time commitment. That is, in a world full of plentiful workers and limited land and other resources, wages fall to subsistence levels. And so in order to get a job at all, they will have to compromise a lot and work hard for low wages. And a slave doesn't really do any better. Owning a slave doesn't really help compared to a situation where the workers are in as bad a negotiating position as they could possibly be, and they have to accept the worst possible, wage working conditions.
But if we're talking about an artificial intelligence that necessarily doesn't think like human beings, can we accurately predict how they would react? Would they accept the confines, let's say, of modern capitalism?
So humans have pioneered many innovations that animals didn't have. For example, we have language, we have long-distance travel, we have trade, we have law, we have war. We have a lot of institutions that other animals just didn't have, and I think most of those are going to stay. They aren't temporary things. Law, for example, I think has legs. It's going to last. So does language. These aren't temporary things. And I think by what you mean by capitalism is just property and trade, and that'll last. Property and trade is going to continue, even in a world of AI, because it's just a useful institution in so many ways. So, like law or language is a useful institution in many ways. They will continue because they just are more practical than the alternatives, and so will property and trade. So AIs would have property and trade, but property of individuals is slavery. That's what slavery is. It's property of individuals, and it's not obvious that that won't exist in the future. But I just can give you some economic considerations saying how it would be less, likely because of the relative price of labor versus other things.
Well, might it also be that we know about the uncanny valley, how human beings are unsettled by things that are not human but humanoid.
Right?
Would it be even feasible for artificial intelligences to penetrate into society? Would you really want to have, for example, let's call it a humanoid looking doctor who may have far better surgical skills hand wise, but doesn't have the intuition and experience of a 60-year-old doctor if you're going to get your hernia fixed?
I think when you're thinking about AI futures, you have to distinguish what's your time scale you're thinking about. So at the moment, we're early in the days of AI and have been for a half century. At some point, we will be in an intermediate scenario where AI is actually taking over a substantial fraction of the economy, maybe 10, 20%, 30%, or et cetera. And that will be a different world than we're in now, where, say, even all computer-based things are only taking 5% of the economy. But in a much longer time frame, it's just AIs take over everything. And it's not, can we tolerate them? It's more, can they tolerate us? I mean, the longer term scenario is AI is just more productive and they just do most everything. And then humans are on the margins as retirees. And it's more the question of how do they treat us?
Which gets to the apocalyptic scenarios from science fiction, the Terminator, the Matrix.
Well, people are concerned about what happens when the AIs are dominating the world. Now, I tend to think of this in terms of the ancestor-descendant relationship.
Yeah.
I say, if you think about what you expected of the future, even without AI, I'd say what you expected is the same as we've seen in the past. Over time, our descendants become more powerful than us, more capable. They do change their minds relative to us about their priorities and values. And then when there are conflicts, our descendants win. That's what happens with us and our ancestors, of course. Yeah. All the way through history, each new generation eventually becomes more capable and powerful than their ancestors, and they win conflicts.
The Mongols could have defeated Alexander the Great's armies. Napoleon could have defeated the Mongols, right. And we could defeat Napoleon.
Sure, but then the next generations could defeat us.
Yeah.
And if I would think of just AI as another kind of our descendants.
Yeah.
And so if you say, isn't it terrible that AI could become more powerful than us and have different priorities than us? I'd say, well, that was just what you expected from all your descendants.
Yeah.
Why pick on these descendants different from the rest?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you have an article that I found you on, AIs Will Be Our Mind Children. It's the title. I don't know what you actually titled it, but that's the title in Quillette magazine.
Yes.
And I think that not only would they be the mind children, but they also will, I think, herald in a society. I can envision 100, 200 years from now, if we get out into colonizing not only our solar system, but getting faster than light speed, you could have humanoid artificial intelligence, you could have natural humans, and in between them, you could have cyborgs, either by choice or by, and I'm not talking the $6 million man cyborg of 50 years ago. I'm talking, people that want to have direct computer interfaces, who want to have, supervision or other kinds of things that, these kinds of Ray Kurzweil type hopes for humanity. I think that's far more likely that we're going to have what we would now call an integrated society with AIs and humans and the vast majority somewhere in between.
So this book, The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth, is about a more human-like AI scenario that's easier to analyze, which is why I studied it. So a brain emulation is where you take a particular human brain and you scan it in fine spatial and chemical detail, and then you make a computer copy that works the same as the brain, but it gains many of the advantages of machine intelligence because now it is made out of a machine that you can make in factories and encode in computer files and send around the world at the speed of light and things like that. And so I think our descendants could be many different kinds of things, but they would have to be similarly productive things, similarly capable. And so it's quite plausible that our current brains are just not the most cost-effective hardware for encoding intelligence. And if so, the kinds of brains that exist in the future would be the kinds that are in the most cost-effective hardware that exists at the time. And therefore, there could be AIs we create like LLMs, there could be these brain emulations, there could be other things. But at that point, biosquishy humans wouldn't be competitive because it would be like, trying to harness a bird to fly as an airplane. Just the hardware would not be as good. But brain emulations are very human. So they are psychologically human. They think of themselves as human. They feel human. So human personality and attitudes and styles would continue with brain emulations, if not biosquishy humans, who might still exist, but just off on the margins. But I think an analogy is we've had two big revolutions in the last, 10,000 years. Roughly 10,000 years ago, we had the farming revolution, and then a world full of forager was displaced to become a world of mostly farmers, but there were still a few foragers left on the margins. And then in the last few centuries, we've had the rise of industry, and now subsistence farmers have been pushed aside and are only on the margins of the world, and most of the world is industrialists. But there are still a few foragers and subsistence farmers, aren't there? And they're not necessarily going to go away that fast. So a next revolution to AI or brain emulations would make this whole new world of fast-growing activity, but the rest of things who remained in the old forms could still remain on the margins.
So what do you think, just economically, is the area most likely to benefit from artificial intelligence 10, 20, 30 years from now? My money says it's the legal profession, because I can imagine a golden age of lawsuits, not only from cars that drive themselves and that are owned by someone. Who do you sue? The owner of the car, the maker of the car, but also too you're going to have lots of these lawsuits about legalities and personhood rights and stuff. So to me, I think we're going to be seeing the legal profession just making bank in the next 20, 30 years.
So I told you that I went into AI in '84. And at the time, one of the things that was impressive at the time is that there were articles in the top medical journals about how AI doctors could diagnose problems as well as human doctors could. Yeah. That was in 1984, 40 years ago. Obviously, computers are vastly more capable now, but regulation of medicine has limited the use and spread of AI in medicine for that period. So regulation is something that may well limit where AI can be applied, and law is pretty heavily regulated, so it's not clear that AI can displace lawyers. I mean, lawyers could use AI assistance, but that's also been true in medicine. But it doesn't displace the lawyers because regulation preserves their situation. And so that's also true for other possible applications of AI. It may well be regulation that determines where they're allowed to make big changes, because otherwise they just, for example, nuclear power was something that was possible 70 years ago, and we decided to heavily regulate nuclear, and then for a long time we just haven't gotten much value out of nuclear because we regulated so much, even though the technology is there and possible. So unfortunately,
So
In order to see the future of AI, we have to ask where it will be allowed.
yeah, which is a good point and one I've rarely heard mentioned. And I think the nuclear stuff is nuclear fission at least is a good example because, as you said, we've had it for now 3/4 of a century almost, or more, actually more than that, 80 years, and that actually seems though to be a smart and wise way to proceed, don't you think? To sort of gradually slide into it rather than just butt up against the
I
wall.
mean, it's possible that we could have gone too fast, but by now I'd say it's pretty clear we went way too slow.
Yeah.
So we hardly have any value from nuclear energy now compared to 1970, say. We just basically shut it down.
But do you think that approach will work for AI?
Um, AI is the technology that's used is just much more widespread than with nuclear. So nuclear has this choke point of the fissile material,
Yeah.
the uranium, say, or thorium, and people were able to regulate nuclear because they could control access to that key material. AI, if it can be done on computers, as you may well know, lots of people have computers. You may have one in your office. And so it makes it much harder to restrict AI. Now, AI companies are using the most advanced chips at the moment to do the most AI, but you can do AI on many other kinds of chips. And, the kinds of chips they're doing on AI were just basically graphics chips before they specialized them more to be AI. So it would really be mechanically hard to restrict AI in the sense that the enabling technology is very widespread. It would be much harder than with nuclear energy.
But we know what happens when there's not government regulation. You end up with, in the worst case scenario, something like Chernobyl, or in a lesser scenario, something like the 3 Mile Island disaster.
And those were tiny compared to
Yeah.
the current suffering we've had from all other forms of energy. Even 1 year's worth of coal is far more harm than we've ever suffered from all nuclear energy,
Sure,
including those exact accidents.
But who knows if we had continued apace with nuclear? I mean, with all the fears and the fear mongering that's going on about artificial intelligence, it seems to me that you should take a more measured approach. Well, I'm not saying that you shut it down totally, but you don't want to have the equivalent of, say, I guess the 3 Mile Island equivalent would be a rogue AI that goes around and murders people in something like the trolley problem.
I mean, we had actually greatly restricted nuclear before 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, it was because of the nuclear bomb made people very, concerned about anything nuclear. And that, I think, is the fundamental emotional source of the restriction on nuclear, was just that association. And there are many people now who are trying to get people as concerned about AI as people were about nuclear. And I know some people like that who are especially concerned. We could talk about them, but it seems to me that most of the public just doesn't buy it. That is, the AIs we've seen in the last few years do not seem very threatening. You have to sort of say, oh, some people talk to it and then commit suicide, or some people could ask it how to build a bomb, or things that are analogous to what you can get from a library anyway. And I think just most people haven't been very scared. You could say, look, they're stealing artists' jobs by copying artists' libraries or something, and that's a concern that you could get people to think is unjust and something should be done. But I just don't think most people are scared of AI at the moment. The AI we see just doesn't look very threatening.
Well, the other thing that the magazine article that I wanted to ask you about, there was a article in Quanta magazine. Let's see, it doesn't give the date. Probably within the last 6 months or so, called "The AI Was Fed Sloppy Code. It Turned into Something Evil." Basically, the misalignment issue, which AI's learning to be deceptive, and if they do get so smart that they're able to outwit our best minds.
Humans, for a long time, have hired other humans who are also not aligned.
Yeah.
As you may know, your employee could slack off on the job or try to steal stuff, or not do what you tell them. Animals could do that too. Animals are misaligned in the sense that a horse might run away, a dog might bite you. We've been in the world of misaligned associates
But an
for a
animal
long
isn't
time.
super intelligent and doesn't have the
Well,
ability to master code and maybe get into the nuclear, things and launch, a missile at one of our enemies and cause World War III.
right, but your LLM being misaligned does not let it get into the nuclear codes and start World War III, right?
Oh, I'm not worried about the AIs that are making the slop, what they call on the internet, the AI slop.
Right.
Well, I'm worried about well, I'm sure you know. Well, this is probably the place to get into it. The three main negative, dark, utopian or dystopian ideas. I'll just give you three movies. One is the Matrix thing, which is total fantasy. The second one is the Terminator scenario, which is maybe slightly more likely, but still highly unlikely. I think is that we're gonna have Terminators. But the most likely to me, and the scariest, is the old Forbin Colossus, Colossus the Forbin project
Right.
with an AI. Now the AI may by itself do it. The AI may with bad actors, be they in the West or in the third
Right.
world or whatnot, or just a terror group. There's a group called Anonymous, which seems to be liberal minded, but imagine a group of hackers, getting in and somehow working with an AI to get code. I mean, that to me is the really scary part of it.
I mean, as long as you imagine the AI is similarly capable to humans, it's the same problem of worrying about humans who are malicious or trying to cause problems. That's why we have careful control of nuclear weapons. We don't let just anybody walk in the room and push the button. And of course, we should give similar controls to AI. So the question is, why do you think AI is more of a threat or a problem than just the humans you have in these loops? You'd have to think they have some special ability or special
Well,
something.
I'm not an expert, but that's what you hear is that you get to forget artificial intelligence, but then AGI and then ASI, in that, I mean, and I don't believe the utopian stuff too. It's not going to be like you get to ASI and in 10 minutes we're going to be building starships to the Andromeda Galaxy.
So again, I distinguish the short term and the long term here, right?
Yeah.
In the short term, these things are being made by capitalist companies who definitely don't want, stories out there of their products hurting people, and they will be watching out for their products hurting people. Just like all companies who, sell machines or human services, right? Like most fast food restaurants don't want their service workers murdering their customers, and they presumably try to prevent that.
But they wouldn't mind it if they could get away with it. I worked in the grocery field, and I can tell
Sure.
you, if it comes to cleanliness, cleaning, paying some janitor
Sure.
for extra hours worth of work or not, they're going to do it. And it may not. Worse you might
Right,
get
but-
from pork that's left out is trichinosis, but trichinosis is not as bad as a nuclear missile strike being launched.
Right, but AIs aren't by their nature things that can do nuclear missile strikes. They are just by their nature things that talk and think. So unless you put it in charge of the nuclear bomb, it doesn't have an extra power there. And people managing the military will be very careful about who they let have access to nuclear powers.
If we just step back from the edge of nuclear, one of the thing that I think is very likely, especially if you have computer-driven cars, and this is AI as the actual thing, not a humanoid AI, but AI as the car. Forget Rosie the robot of the Jetsons, but now the car itself is Rosie the robot. Suppose some bad actors use some foreign AI, and they're not going to blow up the nuclear codes, but they take control of every Hyundai or every make of a Ford pickup truck, and they cause chaos in the LA freeway. 117 died because these cars just went wacky, and
But as long as the cars are there with some sort of computer connection, humans could do that. That's not a thing that only AIs could do. You should worry that humans could do that.
I do. I do. I mean,
Okay,
I'm not living in total fear, but I'm just saying what you hear though is one of the things with ASI is that they will be multiple smarter than the smartest human beings, which makes them far more dangerous if that's true.
Which you're imagining the world like it is now, and this one ASI showing up and going wild with, abandon. That's not how it will happen. It will happen, a whole world will slowly get better, all the AIs will improve, and then eventually the AI's SI will be in a world with lots of others of them who can, counter each other.
Well,
That
and
is even
and I was going to say that to me is the thing is that why do we necessarily assume that ASI or all AIs would be in league with one another? It would seem to me if they are individuals and we want to treat them as persons, there are going to be good AI actors and bad AI actors, and most in between.
I'm an economist, and I would say you should understand that the world you're in right now functions substantially because we have different institutions that check on each other. We don't trust individuals to do things, nor do we trust firms. And in some sense, corporations are the superintelligence of our world. They are far more capable than individuals. They could do enormous harm if they wanted to, but they don't because of the incentives we give them and the checks we have of different institutions checking each other. So if AI shows up in that world, we can just use those same institutions to keep them in check that we keep humans in check, unless somehow they are different. So the question is, what is the difference? You might say, well, they will be smarter eventually than we are now, but they will be in a world of other things at the same time that are smarter too. And remember, that's the whole story. Humanity has been becoming more capable generation after generation. Each generation is more capable than its ancestors and could win conflicts with its ancestors, but it's not a unified thing. It has internal conflicts, and it's the internal conflicts that people focus on, right? At the moment, there's a few, grandparents around, great-grandpas around, but the whole world isn't saying, how can we get back at our great-grandparents? We have all our conflicts with each other, and so our great-grandparents, even though they're small and weak now compared to what they once were, are not the focus of our, attacks. We could attack our great-grandparents, the few that remain, but we don't particularly want to. They don't have that much we would want, and we have lots of other problems with each other.
So let me ask about something that I think also doesn't get enough play in current ideas of what artificial intelligence is. And I mentioned how I think the legal profession is going to have a boon coming to them with lawsuits and hashing the rights of personhood out for artificial intelligence. I would think that it's gonna be very easy 50 or 70 years from now, maybe the year 2100, that you hash out not only the legal rights, but human beings are going to end up marrying and being in relationships with these artificial, especially these humanoid artificial robots. Because you mentioned earlier about some AI supposedly driving some youngsters nuts and to kill themselves or whatnot. But it seems very, we live in the term now is incel. For the last 10 years you've heard that term about these lonely neck bearded guys or whatnot. Now if you can make, let's say if it costs $20,000 in 10 years to make, pick whatever Hollywood starlet or pop celebrity you wanted. You can make a clone of, I guess, Scarlett Johansson and have it seem like Scarlett Johansson or what your idea of it is. That's going to be probably one of the things that drives AI acceptance into the human fold more than just legislation. Do you agree?
So think about the Industrial Revolution, right? There were a bunch of subsistence farmers out there, and then a new kind of economy showed up, the industrialists, and they had factories and machines, and they lived in cities, and eventually made cars, telephones. You could imagine, if you were thinking about this ahead of time, that there would eventually be the war of the industrialists versus the farmers, and the industrialists would win this war because, hey, they're much more powerful. And there were many wars in the era of the rise of industry, but none of them were like that. What there were is wars of coalitions of farmers and industrialists against other coalitions of farmers and industrialists. That's what the wars were. The key point was, just because there is a division doesn't mean that's the main focal division of society for conflict. Society may well just focus on other divisions, and that could be good for this change. So you and people have conflicts, you and I. AIs will have conflicts with each other, and then humans can have conflicts with AIs. If we use the same institution for all those conflicts, that will make it easier to transition to a world where AI dominates, because we will continue to keep the peace by using the same institutions that we've always kept the peace with each other, now with them. It would be terrible to make a whole separate world of law and governance for the AIs and separate for humans, because now they would feel less threatened by destroying us if, they hurt the institutions that they use to keep the peace with each other. That threatens them, which means they would want to keep that peace. So, for example, look, today, as I said, retirees, consider retirees and all the people who aren't retired. I don't know if you're retired, so I won't ask, but there's a sense in which the rest of the people in the world who aren't retired could say, look, what are those retirees doing for us? Let's kill them and take their stuff. Why doesn't the world kill all the retirees and take their stuff? Well, one of the main reasons is the mechanism we use to keep peace with retirees is the same mechanism we keep peace with each other. If we did that, a lot of people will wonder who's next, and that would just go badly. So we give retirees property rights. We let them keep it because the same property rights and legal institutions we use to keep peace with retirees is the institution we keep peace with each other. And that would be a good model for the AI too. If the same institution that the AIs keep peace with each other is the institution they keep peace with us, then they will want to keep that peace to not go to war with each other.
So then a recognition of personhood and an acknowledgement of civil rights, both that are equivalent for both biological humans and for AIs, would seem to me a very good thing.
Right. That is, don't have law know about whether a thing is AI in the law. It should just be the same general law for everything, whether it's an AI or not. I would just like all institutions, say voting, legal institutions, financial, to have the same rules for AI as for humans. And so once they learn to abide the same laws that we do and keep their peace with each other in the same way they keep the peace with us, that would make it more likely that we just have a peaceful transition. And so that means yes. However, we relate to the legal system by having certain rights and certain concepts of what we're allowed to control, property rights. They should have those same things so that we can just use the same institutions with them that we do with each other.
But as long as AIs don't want to own other AIs, which would be then AI on AI slavery.
I mean, at the moment, we don't allow that with humans. So by default, we wouldn't allow that with them. But there could be many changes here. And, we can't expect zero changes of law in a transition here. They're going to somehow adapt the law to their new circumstances. But we could at least give them the precedent of starting where we are. And then that would at least help them stay near there.
So let's talk just then economically here. Let's say 50 years from now, or let's just use 2100 as a bellwether, 3/4 of a century from now. Do you reckon that most of natural humans, biological humans, are basically going to be superannuated from work at an early age, if at all? Do you envision, say, someone who's going to do, what we call now craft breweries are probably going to be humans doing it, not AIs. Things like that. But that AIs are basically going to be in the large corporate world. They are going to be the ones going to Mars, building colonies, doing these big projects, whereas the humans will, as I said, be superannuated at 25 or 30 and then can pursue A, B, C, or D.
So my book, The Age of M, tries to predict this world of AI, and it's one particular world of AI, but I think the conclusions about humans are robust there. The key point to notice is, first, when AI starts to grow and dominate the economy, then humans lose their jobs, but humans own most of the capital in the world, so they can be rich retirees, and insurance will help make sure all of them can. And then the new economy will grow faster, perhaps doubling, say, every month instead of every 15 to 20 years like it does now. And that means wealth invested in this economy would also grow at that same rate, doubling every month. So humans who start out with any decent amount of capital will very quickly have a lot of capital, be very rich. So as long as property rights are preserved, humans can have a very luxurious retirement, but they would be outside of the center of the AI world. The center of the AI world would have the AI workers doing stuff, and the humans wouldn't so much control that or be involved in the details of that world, but they would be gaining wealth from their investments in it. And
but most people, even in the U.S., aren't. Look, they live paycheck to paycheck. Does
well,
that
that's
mean
why
we
we need
need?
the insurance I was telling you about. We need to make sure people get insurance so that they will be covered under the situation. And that's, as I said, the most robust conclusion you can make about AI policy from everything we've said for centuries is let's make sure there's that insurance. And
So
so I'm happy to walk through how you might do that.
we will do that in a second here. I just want to ask. So do you then not foresee an AI economic future where universal basic income for, say, biological humans who have lost their jobs is considered a right?
Universal basic income is a sloppy, awkward, not ideal way to try to achieve this insurance I'm talking about.
Okay, go ahead. What's a better way?
So, I mean, the vision people have is that a local government will then tax local AI to pay local humans to have a universal basic income. But there's no reason why the AI economy will be equally spread across the human jurisdictions. Plausibly, the
Cambodia
AI
may not be as
right.
developed as Europe.
AI is likely to be concentrated into a small number of places on Earth, and then the rest of the Earth can't support a universal basic income by taxing their local AIs because they wouldn't be very many. So, universal basic income doesn't actually achieve its purpose in that way because it's tied to these local political entities that are supposed to provide it. So what you fundamentally need is insurance tied to a global asset base, and that's what ordinary insurance can be. But when I say the word insurance here, I mean something that insures you, but it doesn't have to be individually underwritten. So we can actually just have a bet. So we have a financial asset, say a combination of stocks and real estate, et cetera, some sort of index fund, and we split it by a bet according to whether robots take most jobs in a particular period. So basically, nobody knows when robots will take people's jobs, and so there's a chance in any one period it might happen, but it's a low chance, at least long ahead of time. So you split a bet where you say, if robots take jobs, so for example, U.S. labor force participation rate is like 65% now. If it drops down below 30%, I think that's a pretty clear sign that all of a sudden robots took a lot of jobs. So we might say, look, if that statistic happens, then this half of the bet pays off. This asset goes to these people. And if that doesn't happen, this asset goes to these other people. The second set of people are basically selling the insurance, and the first set of people are buying it. That is, you split this asset into two halves. One set of people buy one half, the other set of people buy the other half. And that's a way of transferring risk from the people who feel better able to hold the risk to people who need it more. And so then you would buy this asset that pays out money if robots take most jobs in a short period of time. And you could buy that for yourself, your employer could buy it for you, your nation could buy it for you, but this insurance would be tied to global assets. It wouldn't be tied to your particular location and tax base. So in the case that AI is mostly in Cambodia, you'd still be covered because your asset base is broad.
You're spreading out the pain.
You're covering the risk. That is, this is the index fund, the broad market asset idea, so that you don't know where the winners are going to be, but you just buy it all. And therefore, wherever the winners are, you're going to have a share of that.
Now, that brings up the question, though, again, of slavery in the sense that suppose these AIs are not particularly happy with the rate that they're being taxed and having their funds going to support the squishy humans, as you call
This
them.
isn't tax. I'm talking about voluntary insurance. No tax at all.
But it would still be dependent on the wages earned by the AIs, because we're assuming that they've been granted personhood, correct?
But they would have voluntarily bought into these assets, so there's no tax here. This is voluntary insurance. Insurance can happen without any government involvement, just by people paying premiums, and then they get benefits if things happen. And the other side of the thing can just be the people who own AIs and AIs. There's no slavery or no taxes here.
Okay, so the AIs would as well be buying into the insurance as well as the humans?
They would have sold the insurance, basically, on the other side.
Okay.
That is, initially, AI companies and people who own AI investments, they will be less at risk for losing their jobs, and so they will actually get a premium by selling the insurance. That is, most years this never happens, and then they get a higher rate of return. on their investments. And then the year it happens, they get a lower return, but overall it's a good deal. This is the idea of reallocating risk. That's the whole idea of insurance, is to move risk around, but everybody benefits by moving risk around. Nobody has to be taxed.
Yeah, because when I was first hearing you, I was thinking that AI might view it as a tax, and they'd be like, "Well, we're being taxed without representation." To go back to third school social studies
Right?
class.
I mean, how AIs own property among themselves, and how they get self-ownership, and how much they own, and what sort of political rights they have are a whole separate set of questions. But that doesn't have to affect the insuring people against the risk of losing their jobs. That can just be a whole separate thing.
And what about we have now laws that protect human beings by setting out standards for companies that would dump toxic waste into reservoirs if they could. What happens with would there be, for the example, workers' compensation for AIs if, let's say they were forced to do work that was particularly dangerous? And can an AI say, well, I don't want to go to, I don't know, the mines of somewhere
Right.
on Mars to do a job because AIs have a very high mortality rate there? What I'm trying to do is
Right.
just transpose some of these human things
Right.
into
But
AIs, and are they going to react the
but you're
same
not
way?
realizing we've already been solving those problems for a while. First of all, some people are human miners in our world, right? But mostly they aren't slaves. We pay people to be miners. And so some people have decided that's their best job, is to be a miner. And so our capitalist economy with property rights can solve the problem of who has to be a miner. And it could also do that for AIs. Now, you talk about pollution or other sorts of regulation. We think we solve many problems in our society today via regulation, and AIs could do that too. But sometimes people in our society think a regulation is illegitimate, and that causes social unrest. So there would be a trade-off between the ability to regulate and whether citizens think those regulations are actually legitimate or in their interest. But that would be true for AI as well. That's just the same problem of governance we've always had. So the point is first to think of AI as continuous with us and only ask how are they different in order to predict differences. They are the same with us in the sense that they are productive. They will need to be paid wages to be productive. They might want to have rights and ability to control their income to allocate as they choose.
How about forming unions?
That's completely possible. Again,
The
we allow
United
humans to form
Federation
unions.
of Artificial Intelligence Miners.
Right. The point is, the change to artificial intelligence doesn't invalidate all the reasons why we have many institutions we have. We have law, we have trade, we have property, we have language, we have, gossip, we have arts. We have so many institutions humans have pioneered, but AI can continue to use those institutions, and therefore we don't necessarily need to change them a lot unless there's some particular way in which AI is different that means the human version isn't as appropriate. That's what you should be looking for, is ways in which our laws and language and capitalism, etc., is tied to some particular feature of humans that doesn't generalize well to AI.
So, having talked to you for almost an hour now, where would you put yourself on the scale of 0 to 100 if 0 is the dystopian Terminator, Forbin, Colossus project AI view, and 100 is the utopian view? It seems to me you're probably in the 75 to 80 range. You think overall it's a good thing, and that the world in 100 or 500 years will still, if not be the same, will follow the same general patterns of history.
Let me distinguish one way in which I might be utopian, another way I might be dystopian.
Okay.
Because I just want to be clear.
Okay.
The big war of humans against AI, I'm not seeing.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the Terminator slashing the ground, destroying everything in a big war. Okay? War is possible, but I just doubt it'll be that alliance. Like I said, in the industrial era, there were wars, but they weren't the industrialist versus the farmer wars. There were other sorts of wars. So I think property rights can continue, law can continue, language can continue. So AI can share those things with us. But what I might be dystopian, depending on how you think about it, I don't think it is dystopian, is that I accept that our descendants, AI or not, will come to become more powerful than us. They will win conflicts with us, and they will, in fact, disagree with us. So if you look at the last century or so, humanity has undergone a lot of cultural change, a lot of value change. You know, the current generation differs from my generation in a great many value ways, and they are going to win those conflicts. Just like my generation won the conflicts with my ancestors when we overlapped.
Yeah.
So there have been large changes of values and norms, and the new generations have won against the old in those conflicts, and I predict that will continue. If you think that's dystopian, okay. You know, what you wanted was for change to stop and for your generation to stay in control of the future forever, not to have your generation subside just like all the previous generations have. I get there are people who want that. They say, why should our generation give up control and let future people have control? We want to keep control of the future forever. That's never happened before, and I just don't think it's going to happen now, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of the people that looks at something like the Star Trek franchise as not utopian, but actually a very slick dystopia. But I'm more of a middle roader. We're going to have issues and problems that we can't even envision, now in 100 years, AI or not AI, to get back to like with the dark forest hypothesis. I think that it's probably a good thing if we do have super intelligent AI, because they may be able to help us fend off a possible invasion or something. But just in closing, let me just ask you, what is your timeline for, let's say, the rest of this century? Do you think when do you think the first AI will be granted personhood? When do you think we will reap economic benefits and hopefully eliminate poverty worldwide for humans?
I would like to give you a simple answer, but unfortunately my answer has to be complicated, because I think we're actually facing another big crisis in the world that isn't AI.
Okay.
I think our civilization will soon peak and fall like the Roman Empire did. And if we don't generate human-level AI before the fall, it won't happen until the next civilization that replaces us in several centuries. So that's my timing, you see. We might generate human-level AI, say, in the next 50 years, in which case they will make the population grow rapidly of AIs, and then civilization won't fall so much, at least in that way. But if we don't, then human population will peak in roughly 30 years. Then the human population and economy will decline over the next few centuries, and then AI won't happen for many centuries because this civilization is about to fall. That's unfortunately the complicating answer, but we might achieve AI or brain emulation in the next 50 years, in which case we have this whole new era of the AI, but the AI would then just quickly become the center of the world. It's not so much how we treat them, but how they treat us. They would run the world. They would be the center of the economy, the center of economic power, the center of political power, the center of military power, and then it would be the humans on the margin, retired, who hopefully would be treated kindly by the new powers and allowed to retire in peace with their property and income. But at that point, it's not our choice to make anymore. We don't run the world.
So you're talking about the peaking of human population, the antithesis of what we thought in the 70s, overpopulation, that we'd be underpopulated. Right. But by the same token, would not the advent of at least human level AI, if not greater, be a great weapon in reversing the damage that has been caused by global warming? Because global warming seems to me to be another, thing.
Look, actually, the AIs would probably just generate a lot of heat and create more warming, but they don't care because they're not very vulnerable. Look, AIs don't care that much if the biosphere dies because they're not dependent on the biosphere. So saving the biosphere has to be something that we biological creatures care about because we are more vulnerable to it. So AIs would actually less care about global warming, and they would actually be warming. So you have to understand there's a huge rate of change. Our economy today is doubling roughly every 15 to 20 years. When AI really gets going, the economy doubles every month. That means you would see as much change in a year or two as we've seen in the entire last 300 or 10,000. So all of a sudden, a lot of stuff happens in a very short time. That's why I can say that humanity doesn't change much over that time. So it's actually relatively easy to predict humanity across enormous changes because human and culture just can't change much in a year or two. We're just not that flexible. So humans would be on the side spending their wealth for that year or two as the AI economy grows by a factor of 1,000,000 and becomes this vastly more powerful thing on the earth and does who knows to that point. But it's much harder to predict what happens within the new AI economy and society than what happens to the humans on the margins who are just so slow that not much can happen to them.
Well, it's a fascinating discussion. What is your latest book? Have you written a book specifically on this topic?
I mean, I have the book The Age of M, which is on a certain kind of AI, but I'm currently working on a book about cultural drift, the problem of this fall that we face, the civilization falling, and then which would then delay AI for several centuries if we don't get it before.
Well, again, thank you for talking about it. It was a fascinating conversation.
Nice to meet you, sir.